Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Batra. This is our 10th class in this Masechet, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 65 through 71. So we're in the middle of discussing how a person sells something. If you remember last week, we discussed the concept of ayin yafa or ayin ra'ah. Ayin literally means eye. And the machloket is when a person sells something, do they do it generously, right? Literally, the word means with a nice eye. So do they do it generously or ba'ayin yafa, which is more, I guess, conservatively, I don't want to use the word stingy, but in the sense of not wanting to sell everything, so they retain some things. When I was actually teaching this week, we were trying to think about what this means, and I think again we have to think about it psychologically. What we're talking about in the times of the Gemara, in the times of the Mishnah, we're dealing with definitely a poorer society. And we have seen this before. Again, this is my interpretation, but I think that and we've seen hints to this before, that when someone is selling something, they don't really want to sell their land. It's not like, oh, I'm selling my house here because I found a more beautiful one over there, or I'm thinking of moving to a different neighborhood. Again, I'm not saying those things didn't happen in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, but generally, again, if I can make generalizations, I think that people sold things because they needed to. They needed the money, so they sold, let's say, property. They sold their house, they sold their land, not necessarily because they wanted to, but because they needed to. And therefore, when they're selling, right, again, that's where the machloket comes in. Are they doing it generously? Because, oh, of course, I'm going to include everything that's here, or am I going to take everything that's not nailed down? And we'll see this soon. We're going to talk about selling a house, and those of you who are familiar, right, there's a very big difference when you sell, let's say, an apartment or a house in the, at least I'll talk about in America, versus in Israel. When you rent, or let's say when you rent an apartment, when you come into an apartment, there are appliances. There's an oven, there's a refrigerator, generally, again, maybe not always, but generally. When you come to Israel and you rent an apartment, it is bare. There are not even closets. So we'll see, right? Again, when you leave a place, are you taking everything that's not nailed down, or are you leaving things? Anyway, that's just a little generalization about the machloket, again, that we've been discussing. Does a person sell whatever they're selling, ba'ayin yafa, which means generously, or ba'ayin ra'ah, not as generously, we'll say. So the Gemara on Daf 65 gives us a case of brothers that are dividing the father's estate. The father passed away, now they have their estate. Now, there's actually a machloket in Shas, in the Talmud, when they divide the estate. Are they like partners, or are they like selling? Like, I'm selling you your portion, and you're selling me my portion. So here on Daf 65, the Gemara says that it's like they're selling it. And therefore, if they're selling it, again, that's our machloket, if you do it generously or not, right? So here, the Gemara tells us that a person does not get a path to his portion. And you can't dig an irrigation canal through someone else's field, or right, again, or maybe you do get a path to your field. Again, is the discussion a generous discussion or not? And the halacha is that is according to Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, which is that in general, when you sell something, you do it ba'ayin yafa. You give as much as possible. Let's say you have two houses, one inside the other. Again, this is going to be similar, right? If you sold to two different people. So then the inside doesn't have an access to the outer house, or like through the outer house to get out. Now, none of these things make sense to us in our modern sensitivities. Obviously, when I would buy a house, I should have access to the house. But here the idea is, and think about it, I know like in New York, sometimes there are houses that have a back house, right? Like another house that's on the same property. Now, let's say you rent out the back house. The only way to get there is, let's say, through a driveway, right? That's shared. So one could say, right, you need to buy access to, to the driveway to get to your house. And again, if it's a sale, so maybe you don't get that access and you now have to buy it. But if it's a gift, obviously I'm going to give you, right, access to the house that I'm giving to you as a gift. And here the Gemara talks about, what if the outside house was a gift, but the inside house was a sale? Do you get a path or not? And again, there's the machloket if it's done generously or not. Okay, our next Mishnah discusses selling a house, as we mentioned. Now, again, all of these Mishnayot are discussing when you didn't enumerate in the sale document what was included, right? You're saying, right, I'm not selling you my house, but I am selling you my house on Ma'ale Michael 8, signed Tamara Spitz. Now, I didn't say, does it include the basement? Does it include the, whatever I have, right? Am I including all these things? So let's say I didn't write anything. So what is included in the sale? So the Mishnah tells us the door is included, which is so exciting. But the key is not included. Now we're going to see that, first of all, keys in the times of Mishnah and the Gemara are a little bit different. They're more like the doorknob. They're large, but they are removable. So we're going to see that things that are permanent are sold with the sale, but things that are movable are not. Okay, so again, don't say like, if you don't sell me the key, how am I going to get into the house? We'll figure out a way. But the point is, things that, like I was saying, right, things that are not nailed down are not coming with the house. Okay, so okay, again, right, so movable objects are not sold with the house, but things that are permanent are. Again, selling a house does not include, as we said, the movable parts. And here we're talking about the movable parts of a mill or an oven. Here, even though generally when we speak about an oven in the time of the Mishnah, it's usually attached to the ground. But here the Mishnah is mentioning, if you have, right, a portable oven, right, a microwave or something that is not attached to the ground, that does not come with the house. However, if you say, I'm going to sell you the house and everything in it, so then it includes everything. One would think that is obvious, but it's saying even the movable things, right? The couch, the beds, right? Everything that's in it. If you said everything, it's everything. Okay. However, if it's not part of the house, so then it's not sold, right? If it has nothing to do with the house, right? Let's say I have a car in the garage. So the car is not part of the house. You don't get that. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. Let's go to something else. When you sell a vineyard, so one opinion is, and we'll see this later on also, when you sell a vineyard, it includes all of the accessories that you need to use the vineyard. And this includes even movable objects. And then the Gemara says, no, right, so therefore maybe in the house it should also include movable objects. And the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Maybe it was talking about only permanent things and not necessarily movable items. Okay, so the Gemara tells us that not only is the door included, but you get the bolt and you get the lock. Again, you do not get the key. Again, maybe the point is, if you want a set of keys, I'm going to charge you $10 more, right? It doesn't mean it doesn't mean I get to hold on the keys and you get the lock. I think it means it's not, you might have to pay extra for a set of keys, right? If I don't know. Okay. Now, the Gemara also tells us that anything that's attached to the ground is as if it's part of the ground, right? Therefore, if the key is attached to the house, so then it's sold with the house. If it's not, then it's not. Let's say there was a movable utensil, right, called a kli, right? So let's say there was a movable utensil that was separate, but then it became, right, or then someone attached it to the ground. Is it seen as a kli, as a movable object, even though right now it's part of the ground? Or is it now part of the ground? And this is actually a machloket. And the Gemara takes us to another area in the Gemara where we see this machloket, and that's with mikvah. If you remember, a mikvah, the ritual bath, is filled with water that is rainwater, right, or water that comes from the sky, not water that when you open, not from a faucet. And that's called drawn water, maim she'uvim. Any water that's been in a pipe or in a bucket, that is not valid for a mikvah. It has to be what's called maim chayim, right? Living water, which basically means from rainwater. If you want to, I can at the end discuss how nowadays we actually do have mikvahs that come from a faucet, but I can explain it later. So if you want, we can leave that to the end. But here, the Gemara is talking about, let's say you have a pipe, right? So if you take a pipe and you put it in the ground and now water comes through it, it is seen as maim she'uvim, right? Drawn water, and therefore it is invalid. However, right, so now the Gemara has this machloket, right? So if I attached it to the ground after it was a pipe already, so that's invalid. However, if I put a piece of wood in the ground, so far so good. Now I dug through the wood and I made it hollow. So then when the water goes through it, it's as if the water is, right, rainwater that's going through the ground into the mikvah. So now, even though that wood, one could say it's a pipe, which is a kli, which makes it invalid, or one can say, no, it's just the ground, and maybe it is valid. And that's where we have like a parallel machloket. And then the Gemara says, no, maybe that's not a parallel machloket. Let's go to a different machloket, and that is about a beehive. A beehive is something that is movable, but when you put it into your field, apparently you attach it to the ground. I don't know if you cement it or you attach it to the ground, and now it becomes part of the ground. Or not? Is it still seen as a movable object that's just attached to the ground? And here, the top of Daf 66 tells us it's that exactly is a machloket on whether we see it as a movable object or part of the ground. And it has different practical applications. Is it seen as owning a piece of land? If you're taking something out of it, if you're taking, let's say, honey out of it on Shabbat, is it as if you detached something from the ground, or is it as if you took something out of a vessel and then it would be not as problematic? Okay, another thing. The Gemara mentions a baker's board. It's like maybe like a cutting board, but it was used for either to knead the dough or to display the bread. Now, if this board is attached to the wall, so then it's not seen as a utensil because, again, as we said, anything that's attached to the ground, here it's the wall, but the wall is attached to the ground. So maybe that's it's not seen as a vessel anymore. But the sages say, Chachamim say, no, This is something different. We can't compare the two things because this is actually a flat wooden board. In Hebrew or in the Gemara, it's called pshute kli etz, which means it has a different law because if something is wooden, in order to make it a utensil, it needs to have what's called a beit kibul, which means a how would you say that? I don't know, give me words. Something that will hold something else, like a depression. Is that a good word? It needs to be concave. Maybe that's a good idea, but it has to be concave. It makes it into a vessel, but okay. Anyway, it needs to have that. If it's flat, it's not seen as a vessel in halachic terms in Jewish law, as opposed to as an aside, as opposed to metal, right? We know that something metal like a knife is a flat piece of metal. That is clearly a utensil. Again, utensil not being a bowl, but utensil something that I use. Wood, again, because I guess a wooden board is not necessarily a useful object unless you're building, unless you designate what its use is. So for wood, it needs to have, container, that's better, right? It needs to have that. But if it's flat, it doesn't count as a utensil, as a kli, and therefore this baker's board is not the same machloket as our machloket beforehand. Okay, let's go to since we're talking about water, right? Again, we were talking about water flowing through a pipe versus through the ground for a mikvah. So now the Gemara talks about how food becomes susceptible to becoming impure. If it has become wet, meaning you purposely made it wet, now it is susceptible to tum'ah, to impurity. So the Gemara tells us it has to be on purpose and not attached, right? So let's say you have rainwater that a person wants to fall on his mill, right? So now the mill is attached to the ground. Now, the mill has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but if there are seeds around the mill, right? So if the water falls on the seeds next to this mill, is it seen as on purpose? Because we said we wanted the water to fall on the mill. We didn't necessarily care about the seeds around it, but because we wanted the water on the mill, maybe that's enough to make the seeds susceptible to impurity. And we say, no, again, when we said that the mill is attached to the ground and it's like the ground, therefore, it doesn't make the things around it susceptible to impurity, or maybe it does. And Teku, we're not sure the answer to this machloket. Okay, so back to this discussion of what is considered karka, which is land, and what is considered movable objects. We know that in general, a daughter does not inherit land or the estate from her father if there are brothers, right? So the brothers get the estate. However, if she is single and not married, she gets a tenth of the estate that's put aside for her as her dowry. And this is given at, so that she can get married. But this is only from karka, from land of the estate, right? It doesn't come from the Ming China, vase that's in the cabinet. It can only be from land that the father owned. So now the Gemara asks, what is included in land? So the Gemara says she can collect from the mill. right? The mill is seen as attached to the ground. So this shows that the mill is attached to the ground, and therefore it is called, right, part of the ground. She can also collect from the rent that they're collecting from property, right? So let's say he owns an apartment building. The rent that they collect is tied to property, and that's called the estate, and therefore she can get a tenth of that as well. Okay, Daf 67. Let's say you are selling your courtyard. So again, if you remember how it's set up, a courtyard has numerous houses in it. So we just did selling a house. Now let's say you sell the whole courtyard, right? Let's say you own the whole courtyard. Maybe you can think of it as like a cul-de-sac, right? So you own everything in that circle. So what is included? The homes are included. Any pits or cisterns that are collecting water are also included, but nothing movable that's in the courtyard, right? So if there's a wheelbarrow there, if there's, I don't know, whatever you'd put outside in your courtyard, that is not included if it's movable. Again, if you say, and we're just going to keep doing this, right? If you say, I'm going to sell you the courtyard and everything in it, it includes everything in it, right? Meaning anything that you use for the upkeep of this courtyard, you are selling, even if it's movable items. However, even if you say everything, what is not included? If there's a bathhouse or an olive press, those things are not included. Or maybe this is the opposite. When I sell you the cul-de-sac, right? When I sell you the chatzer, I'm only selling you the airspace, but I'm not selling you any of the houses in that area, which is, I would say, a more extreme case. Okay, so now the Gemara explains. So what are we selling? Let's say there are stores that open into the courtyard. They are sold with the courtyard because they're seen as part of the courtyard. However, if they open out into, right, the other side, right, which could be another courtyard or an alleyway or the public domain, so then they're not included. Let's say they have an opening on two sides, right, inside and outside. Maybe they're included, maybe they're not. Maybe it depends where the majority of the people who use the store, where they come from. Maybe that is what determines. Okay, and here there's like a discussion of does it include the houses, right? So it's dirta or darta, which is the gardens. Like maybe it only includes, right, the open areas, the garden, but not necessarily the houses. Maybe it also includes the houses and the gardens. So that's a machluket here. Again, right, what does the word chatzer, courtyard, what does it mean? Right? Does it mean just the open area, right? Like here, like in modern Hebrew, you'll say, right, the kids went to go play in the chatzer. Chatzer is, you know, the front yard, the backyard. It doesn't mean they went to your house. So maybe it means the open areas, or maybe they learn it from the Mishkan, from the tabernacle in the desert. It had a Ohel Moed, right? It had a tent, it had a home, it was God's home in it, and therefore it also includes the homes that are in the courtyard. Let's say you sold a sand field, like for making glass, or a riverbed. So if you, you sold both the sand field and the riverbed. If you do chazaka, right, if you do some sort of action on one of them, you do not acquire the other one. So now the Gemara says, why? If I just made a sale and I bought two things, usually if I acquire one, I get to acquire the other. And the Gemara gives the example of, right, if I buy 10 fields, if I acquire one of them, I get all 10. So the Gemara says, well, if I have 10 fields, they all have the same purpose. But here, a riverbed and a sand field have two different purposes. Therefore, I can't acquire one by acquiring the other. You have to do something on both of them. Or the Gemara obviously has another opinion that yes, you can acquire one by acquiring the other. Okay, next Mishnah. Let's say you sell an olive press, and I think the art scroll for putting in a picture of an olive press. This is just one type, but you can also Google different types of olive presses. Actually, okay, fine. The one in the times of the Mishnah, I think were probably even more simple than this, but right, not necessarily with a screw in the middle, probably more like with weights. But let's say you sell an olive press. Again, the essential and connected parts are included. Other things aren't included. What are the things that are not included? So the boards, the beams, the wheel, or maybe the beam is included. So here the Gemara goes through like each thing and what it is, right? So there's like a pool, that's called like the vat, where you put the olives in, that's included. And the mortar that squeezes them, that's also included. They're like large beams or boards, so you can sell, right? You sell like the lower ones, but not necessarily the upper ones, right? And you sell the beam, which is like the big thing at the top, because obviously that's like the most essential part. So I thought it was just interesting to see what this looked like. Okay, let's say you sell a bathhouse. Again, if hopefully you're getting the general structure of these Mishnayot, right? So you get the bathhouse, but you don't necessarily get, right, the boards, and the Gemara is going to tell us what these boards are, but it's like boards that to stand on. You don't get the basins, the towels, and let's say even if you sell everything, you don't get the water storage tanks or like the sheds in the back. The Gemara explains, right, you do sell, let's say, the room or the closet for the board and the storage, like for the storage, right? You get the closets, but you don't get the things in the closet. In Israel, you don't even get the closets, I'm just telling you. And again, it doesn't include the water reservoir. It doesn't matter if it's winter or summer, it doesn't include the reservoir. Okay, 68. Let's say you're selling a city. I don't know, you're very rich, you own a city, you decide you're going to sell the city. It includes the homes, the cisterns, the bathhouses, the olive press, right? If you're again following, right, we went from something small and we're getting bigger and bigger, and it's becoming more and more inclusive. So when you sell the city, you sell everything. Again, you don't sell the movable things, right? So the cars, the things in the closet, right? Your clothing, you're not selling those things. Again, if you said everything, you get everything. And it also includes the santer. We don't know what a santer is. The Gemara is going to discuss it. Okay, so now the Gemara explains, again, what does it mean you don't get the movable things? It means also slaves. Here, they're seen as movable items, which is very interesting because in many places in the Gemara, if you remember, we said that slaves are like karka, they're like land, and one would think that they would be sold, but here they are not sold. Or the Gemara says it's not necessarily that they're seen as movable utensils. Rather, there's a concept of movable karka, movable land, and not movable land. Okay, we said the santer is included. What is a santer? One option is it's a person, it's a town clerk. He is included in the sale, not him physically, but his employment. I guess he goes with whoever owns the city, or maybe it means the fields around the city. And then the Gemara like linguistically discusses like, wait, the fields around the city are called bagi, they're not called santer, or maybe we're talking about the gardens around the city, right? Are they included or not? So there's actually a machloket, as we saw, of what the santer is and what is included in the sale. So Then the Gemara tells us that a town scribe is also included in the sale, and the santer, therefore, if the town scribe is included, then the santer has to be the clerk. So it seems that it's like two different employments. One is included, one could not be included. Okay, what about like broken pieces of land, right? If they're beyond the field that is around the city, so then they're not included. But right, again, the fields around are included. The suburbs, right? Those of you who lives in the suburbs, they're included part of the city sale. So if someone, sells Queens, you're all, so the suburbs go with it, or maybe not. Again, a machluket. Enclosures of animals are not included in the sale of the city. If they open towards the city, then they actually are included. And if they open outside the city, then they are not included. If they're designated for the city themselves, then they are part of the sale. And if not, then not. Okay, now comes a little bit more complicated. Let's say you're selling a field. So what is included in the field? So the stones, again, we'll define what it means, the stones, but the stones are included, or there are certain stones that are included. The reeds in the vineyard that are in the field are included. The wheat that's attached to the ground is included. A watchman's hut, we'll see depending when it's included or not. A carob tree that is not strong enough to be grafted, and a young sycamore, all of those things are included. They're seen as part of the field. What is not included in the sale? Things that are not necessary for the field, and basically the opposite of all the things that we just mentioned. 1 second. I don't know what that says. Okay, hold on 1 minute. Sorry, I got it. Things that are never sold with the field, meaning even if you say, you can have everything, things that are never sold with the field. An area of reeds that is a certain large size, so then that is not sold. And we're going to see that each thing that's not included is going to be something that is important in and of itself. And therefore it is not sold with the field. A watchman's hut that is plastered, so it becomes important, and an adult carob or sycamore tree, they're each important in and of themselves, and therefore they're separate and they're not sold. Okay. Okay, Daf 69. The Gemara tells us which stones are included in the sale of a field. The stones that are used to weigh down the grain that was harvested, right? So they're part of the harvest process. Or they're stones that were piled up on the field because the person wanted to make a fence. So they haven't been made into a fence yet, but they're there either arranged or piled ready to be made into a fence. So those are included. We said the reeds in a vineyard are included. What are these? These are reeds that are placed under the vine so that it lifts the vine off the ground, and then you get all the grapes right off the ground, and then you see all the grapes are easy to harvest. So these are actually smoothed out reeds. Okay, we said the grain, even though it's ready to harvest, is included in the sale. You might have thought that it's not included because it's not drawing its nourishment from the ground anymore because it's fully formed. Maybe it would not be considered attached to the ground or come together when you sell it. So the Gemara says, no, it does come. A hut that's not connected to the ground, but because it's not seen as very important, because it's not plastered, it is sold with the field. And we said young trees are sold. Okay, what is not sold? Basically, the opposite of everything that we just said. Stones that were not prepared are like to make a fence are not sold. Or if they were not even placed on the field, reeds that weren't yet put under the vine or they weren't smoothed out yet. We said again, if the reed is in a large area, it's not seen as part of the field. It's seen as something separate, and therefore it is not sold. If the hut is cemented, again, this hut is like for the watchman who's watching the field. If it's cemented, then even if it's connected to the land, it's seen as important, and therefore it is not sold with the field. Okay, let's say, okay, so we were talking about trees, right? So if you have a unique tree in your field, it is not included in the sale of the field. And this is actually learned from the sale of Ma'arat Machpelah, the cave of the patriarchs, which is just down the road from here in Hebron, because right, the Torah describes how Abraham bought the land so that he can bury Sarah, and it says that he gets the whole field and all the trees that are within the boundary of the field that he bought. So the Gemara says, what does it mean that's within the boundary? It means any tree that is identified by the boundary, right? Oh, that's the tree that's on Tamara's field, right? But if you have a very large tree that's very unique, right? So like a sycamore is very unique. So right, if that's known as Tamara's sycamore tree, right? So then it's important in and of itself. It's not seen as connected to the field, and therefore it is not sold with the field. Okay. However, the Gemara says that when you sell a field, you really should write in the document that you acquire, right, all the trees that are on the property. Even though if you didn't write it, you still get it. It's still better to write it in the document. Let's say a person said, I'm selling you my field and palm trees. So now the person has to give him a field plus a minimum of 2 palm trees, because trees means 2 at least. So you have to give them 2 palm trees. Let's say you said a field with palms, so then it has to be on the field. And if it's not, then the sale is void. Let's say you said a field for palm trees. It doesn't need to have palm trees. It just needs to have, like, I guess, good soil for palm trees. What's interesting, the Gemara tells us, is that in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, if you said the word tree, it did not include palm trees. Palm trees were called, right, dikle or kalim. A dekel is a palm tree. You clearly called it a dekel. You didn't call it an ilan, right? Even, we know the word ilanot, right, means trees. So a palm tree is not included in this. I thought it was so funny when I taught this daf, because literally last Shabbat, we had a discussion at our table. We were eating hearts of palm, and my son said, you should just know that a palm tree isn't really a tree. It's really like a tall grass, and it's not really a tree, even though it looks like a tree. So it was just fascinating. Even though the truth is, if you eat a date, you say borei pri ha'etz, but really, and maybe Aliza can tell us later more, but really it's not a tree. And it's interesting that in the Gemara, it's not called a tree. Therefore, what's the point of all this? Let's say a person says, I'm going to sell you my field, except for the trees, right? I'm not selling you the trees. So what is right? Except for trees, you're excluding the trees, but it includes the palm trees, right? So if you have an apple tree, an orange tree, all of those things are excluded. But you are selling the palm tree, right? Because, right, again, it also a vine, right? A geffen, a vine is also not a tree. So it's right. If I say I'm selling you the field, but not the trees, um, so then you would be selling, right, the vines, right, or the palm trees, because those are not called trees. However, the Gemara says, what if there are no trees on the property and there's only a vine? So then it must be that that's what he meant, right? I'm not selling you the grapevine, right? And if there's, let's say, only a palm tree and there's nothing else, so he meant I'm not selling you the palm tree, but he didn't say it in the proper way. Okay, Daf 70. So let's say you say, I'm selling you the field except for that carob tree. Now, remember, we said the carob tree wasn't going to be included. So why would he exclude it? It's already excluded. So what does it mean when he excluded that carob tree? Does it mean that he's selling all the other ones? So the Gemara says no. Just like when I say I'm selling you this field, but not that field, it doesn't mean that you get another field, right? It means I'm saying you're getting this field. So just like he's saying not this carob, it also means not another carob, right? You don't get any of the carobs. Okay. Since this discussion was a discussion of the judges of the diaspora, there's another discussion that they had about returning collateral. This we actually did, that when you return collateral, is a person, right, is the shomer, the guardian, believed to say that they returned the collateral or not. And here the Gemara says that he is believed even without taking an oath. Okay. Now, since we're talking about collateral, so the Gemara brings another machloket of someone who's trying to take property from orphans, so they can swear and collect the property or the item, or sorry, they can collect the money, or maybe they only get half. And this is a very specific case. I don't know if you remember, but in Bava Metzia, we talked about a business deal where there's an investor and a managing partner. And if you remember, we discussed that the way the sages made it so that it wouldn't be seen as interest, they said that half of it is a loan and half of it is an investment, meaning half needs to be repaid no matter what happens. The other half gets repaid, but based on profits or losses. So here, that's this issue here. It's called a shtar kis with these orphans. The father, right? The investment was with the father. They don't know what was returned, what was paid back or not. And then, so the Gemara says maybe the person who's the investor, right, who's owed the money, maybe he swears and he collects everything, or maybe he just swears and he only gets half, right? Meaning the loan, that's, he only gets half. Right, they have to pay back the loan, but not necessarily the deposit. And the halacha, the Gemara says, the halacha is that again, the custodian, the shomer, is believed to say that he returned an item that was set as collateral. However, the orphans do need to pay the whole thing, meaning the deposit and the loan, if the investor swears, because maybe the father, because if the father would have paid it back, he would have told the kids, just so you should know, I paid back this loan. And the fact that he didn't say it means he probably didn't pay it back, and therefore the orphans have to pay it back. Or no, obviously another opinion. They do not have to pay back the deposit because maybe the father died before he had the opportunity to tell them, and therefore they only have to pay back half. Okay, last daf for today. Daf 71. The Mishnah tells us what is not included in the sale of the field. The pit, meaning the water cistern, a wine press, a dovecote, all of these things are not included. But let's say the owner is retaining the right to these things, but the seller, right, that's the original owner, has to buy back a path to these things. Again, here we're saying that when he sells generously, which means that he's giving everything, and therefore he needs to buy back access to the things that he is keeping. That's one opinion. Chachamim say no, he does not have to buy a path because he's selling it not so generously. So obviously, when he's retaining the let's say the dovecote, so obviously he's retaining a path to get there as well. If the seller says you can have everything except for the pit, so then he does retain the path, right? Because if he's going to hold it back and say specifically that, obviously he wants to be able to access it, and therefore he does have a path. Let's say the flip case. Let's say a person just sold the pit, right? The water cistern, that's on his field, right? He just sells the water cistern. So then the buyer doesn't have to buy a path because obviously when he's selling it generously. Ba'ayin yafeh, ba'ayin yafa. The Chachamim say no, you have to also buy a path because again you're not selling it so generously. Okay. All of the things we just mentioned are if there is a sale. However, if you're giving a field as a gift, so then you're giving everything because obviously when you're giving a gift that's being generous, so obviously you're being generous, right? You're not going to be stingy with a gift. I mean, maybe you will, but here the Mishnah says that if you're already giving a gift, you're doing it in the nicest way possible. Let's say you have the brothers who split the estate. Each brother gets everything that's in the field, meaning each brother says, obviously, I have a portion in your field, but I'm not going to keep that portion. You get that. And I get this and you get that. So it's split evenly. And the same thing with acquiring the property of a convert who doesn't have any heirs. So also you get the field and you get everything that's in the field. Let's say you sanctify a field. Generally, you would do it generously. Therefore, you get everything. Or no, you get nothing, and you only get the carob and or the sycamore tree that is on the field. So now the Gemara is going to discuss. Again, when you give a gift, you're giving everything, and therefore you're doing it generously. But right, if you're not going to give it generously, then you should say something, right? I'm giving you this field, but just so you should know, I'm keeping X. If you don't say that, so then you're not keeping X and you're giving everything. Let's say a person says, I want you to give so-and-so a house, right, this house that I own. Sorry, I'll say it again. I want you to give him a house that holds 100 barrels. Now, let's say you go to the guy's house and it actually holds more than 100 barrels. So you might think that you only give him, right, 2/3 of the house. The Gemara says, no, if you're giving a gift, obviously you meant, I'm giving you my house. And I didn't remember exactly how much it held, but you have to give the whole house, again, ba'ayin yafa, with a generous outlook. Okay, what does it mean when you sanctify your field? Is it, right, when I'm giving something to the temple, right? Do I do it? Is it like I'm giving a gift, or is it like a sale, right? So the Gemara tries to see, maybe it's similar to when a person sells a field, but let's say keeps 2 trees for himself. So he retains the land under the tree, right? Because here the roots weaken the ground. Therefore, right, if let's say the tree dies, the owner wants to be able to plant more trees. So maybe in this case, right, the person who sells the land but not the trees also retains the land that's under the trees. But right, therefore, the Gemara says maybe with this charuv and this the carob and the sycamore, maybe the idea is that they're drawing nutrients from the field. Therefore, if you sanctify the field, you're sanctifying the trees that are pulling nutrients from the sanctified tree, from the sanctified field, and therefore these trees become sanctified. And therefore the Gemara concludes that when you sanctify something, you're doing it generously. And even though when you'd sell a field, it would not include the sycamore and the carob, here it does when you sanctify it. Okay, we are going to stop here for today. So just wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Chodesh Tov. We're now in Elul. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'm happy to open it up for questions and comments.
I'm so tired. I can't think. Honey, the roots do not weaken the ground. It solidifies it. It holds it. People plant things to keep. So just for your edification, you say it over and over. It's the opposite.
Interesting. For some reason, the Gemara feels that it maybe what it means, and now correct me if I'm wrong, that it like pulls nutrients from the ground, and therefore if you grow something, maybe it's not good for when you grow things around it. Like it'll pull the nutrients away. Again, don't forget, when I'm buying a field, I'm buying it because I want to plant grain generally. Right.
So then you've got a mess because it takes a lot to get the roots out. I understand that.
Exactly. Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Right. So again, if I have a tree on my field, that does not help if I want to plant wheat. I think that's the idea.
Can I talk to Zohar?
Sure.
She has a Zohar. You know, when you said it's also curious because of the banana. Well, the banana, it's Adamah, and you know why? Because the portion that produces the banana dies off every year, and therefore, even though we say banana tree, it's not a tree, according to the rabbis.
I know, exactly.
Yeah, well, you started the conversation.
It's a mother and a baby, and then the mother dies, and the baby becomes and then another baby. In other words, it's so.
And I think that's one of the most interesting because people still say banana tree, and it's not.
It's not.
Nice.
Yeah, it was difficult for me to adjust as I would want to buy trees to plant in Israel. And one of the options would also be grape. Oh. And I'm like, that's not a tree. But but it was classified in the sale that it would be a tree.
Beautiful.
But I did hear this discussion where didn't they go and then kind of reverse this in the narrative? Didn't they say it's not a tree? So what's going on?
Okay, but who are you talking to? Anybody?
I'm talking to Rabbanit first.
Okay, so I'll talk about from a halachic side, and then Aliza can talk in terms of like the agricultural side. In the Gemara, it is seen as a tree because it's something that comes back every year. You don't have to replant, and therefore, right, you would say ha'etz on grapes. It is something that you bring bikurim from, meaning it is classified. We'll call it. We'll classify it as a tree. However, it's not referred to as a tree. right? So again, if we're trying to be clear in terms of like contract law, if I say I am selling you my tree, it's not going to include a vine. So again, the Gemara talks about what if I say, right, again, I'm selling you my tree and I only have a vine, so it must be that you meant the vine. But in general, it's not the way you would refer to a vine. But halachically, like if we're talking about fruits, it would be called a tree in the sense of brachot and in terms of laws of trees. Okay, Aliza, take it away.
I'm starting to vibrate. In the Art Scroll series, the laws of brachot, and you talk about grapes. This is so fascinating. You say, and by the way, it has to do with the height of the something. That's why strawberries versus vine, and then all of a sudden it's a tree, it's not a tree. They only have two choices. But I want to go back to the beginning. You say, it's if you can see through the skin, it means it's right. But if not, then it's adama
Wow.
on
What?
grapes.
No, but you can't see through an
That was a
orange.
direct quote out of Laws of Brachot from the Art Scroll series.
But you can't see through an orange, and that's how.
No, I'm talking about grapes. We were talking about
Oh.
grapes. You know, the skin of the grape. If you can see through it, then it's more ripe, and then you say, "Hi, it's." You know, but if you go to the store and get a grape that's yucky, you really should say "adama," but nobody ever does.
Because nobody wants to eat it.
Right. I think it's more of a discussion of ripe versus unripe. Not like fruit versus vegetable. That I just want to say. Because right, if you're eating something unripe or something that's not usually eaten, you would not necessarily make a bracha. I'll never forget. In like 6th grade, I got out on my bracha bee because they asked me lemon, and I said ha'etz, and they said no, it's shahakol because nobody eats lemons, and because
Are you kidding? I used to put salt on.
I know, but I was a kid and I didn't argue, and I lost the bracha bee. But there is this idea of if something is not normally eaten in that way, you would not make the appropriate bracha, right? You won't make an et. So I think when you were talking about the grapes, I think that's the discussion, like ripe versus unripe.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Amazing.
I think also the reason with the ha'etz is more of if it's a multi-year
right.
Plant. In other words, the banana is not a multi-year, right? So so it's adama, but the grape, even though it's not really a tree, but every year it'll give you grapes again. It's not a 1 year; it's a perennial.
Right. Exactly.
Well, with that reasoning, Zohar, so is a banana bush. But I would. Okay, we'll stop.
Amazing.
Have a good Shabbos.
Wishing everyone a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat, and it should be a good Elul with only good news, b'sorot tovot, positive things. All right.
Amen.
Have a great Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Bye-bye.